World War II, the deadliest war in human history. A conflict that spanned every continent, claimed more than 70 million lives, and forever altered the course of humanity. But here's a question we rarely stop to ask. How did the world stumble into such devastation, barely 20 years after the so-called war to end all wars? The answer is not found in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. The story begins far earlier, in the ashes of World War I. This is the first episode of our series, Shadows of War, the Origins of World War II. Over the coming chapters, we'll unravel how the collapse of old empires, the failure of peace treaties, and the desperation of ordinary people created fertile ground for dictators, and how the world walked, step by step, into catastrophe. So let's go back to 1918. The guns have fallen silent, but the world is anything but at peace. On November 11, 1918, at precisely 11 a.m., the First World War ended. After more than 4 years of bloodshed, 20 million dead, and 21 million wounded, silence fell across the Western Front. Soldiers staggered out of trenches, stunned that it was finally over. But the world they returned to was not the same. Europe had been gutted. Cities lay in ruins, economies were in tatters, and entire generations of young men had been lost. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Tsarist Russia, 4 great powers, had collapsed in just a few years. And in Paris, leaders of the victorious Allied nations gathered to decide the fate of the world. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 was one of the most ambitious diplomatic gatherings in history. Delegates from 32 nations attended, but only a few truly mattered. Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Britain, and Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Together, they would dictate peace. Wilson came with his famous 14 points, a vision of a fair and lasting peace built on self-determination and the creation of a new international body, the League of Nations. Clemenceau, however, had no interest in fairness. France had suffered terribly during the war. Clemenceau wanted Germany punished, weakened forever, and forced to pay. Lloyd George stood between them, balancing Britain's desire to weaken Germany, but not so much that it couldn't recover and remain a counterweight to Soviet Russia. The result? The Treaty of Versailles, a compromise that satisfied no one and angered nearly everyone. The Treaty of Versailles, the Diktat. Signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Treaty of Versailles imposed devastating terms on Germany. Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause, forced Germany to accept full responsibility for starting the war. Reparations demanded from Germany totaled 132 billion gold marks, an astronomical sum designed to cripple its economy. The German army was reduced to 100,000 men, forbidden tanks, heavy artillery, aircraft, or submarines. The Rhineland was demilitarized, and Germany lost 13% of its territory, including Alsace-Lorraine to France and key industrial regions. Overseas colonies were stripped away, given to Britain, France, and Japan. In Germany, the treaty was called a Diktat, a dictated peace. Newspapers and politicians denounced it as a national humiliation. Many Germans did not feel defeated in 1918. Their armies had not been crushed on German soil. Instead, they believed they had been betrayed by weak politicians at home, the so-called stab-in-the-back myth. This resentment would fester for decades, becoming one of Adolf Hitler's most powerful propaganda weapons. From the ashes of the Kaiser's empire rose a fragile experiment in democracy, the Weimar Republic. Named after the city where its constitution was drafted, it was Germany's first attempt at a parliamentary democracy. But from the very beginning, Weimar was haunted by enemies and burdened by Versailles. In the early years, Germany was in chaos. Communist uprisings broke out in Berlin and Bavaria. Right-wing paramilitaries, the Freikorps, roamed the streets, fighting leftists and assassinating politicians. In 1920, the Putsch, an attempted right-wing coup, briefly seized Berlin before collapsing. In 1923, hyperinflation struck. Paper money became worthless, housewives burned banknotes for fuel. Children played with stacks of marks like building blocks, and savings were wiped out overnight. That same year, a fringe extremist named Adolf Hitler tried to seize power in Munich with his beer hall putsch. It failed, and Hitler was jailed. But he used his trial to spread his message: that Germany had been betrayed by Jews, Marxists, and cowardly politicians. His ideas were extreme, but he was patient. He would wait for his moment. The Golden Twenties and the Crash. From 1924 to 1929, Germany briefly stabilized. American loans under the Dawes Plan helped rebuild the economy, and German culture flourished. Berlin became a center of art, science, and cinema. But this fragile prosperity depended on the United States, and when the Wall Street crash of 1929 struck, everything collapsed again. Factories shut down. Unemployment soared past 6 million. Hunger and despair spread, and once again, Germans began looking for answers, and for someone to blame.
The rise of dictators. While Germany suffered, strong men were rising across Europe. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already seized power in 1922, marching on Rome and establishing the first fascist state. He promised strength, order, and national pride, ideas that resonated beyond Italy's borders. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin consolidated power after Lenin's death. Through purges, terror, and propaganda, he turned the USSR into a totalitarian superstate. And in Germany, the Nazis were waiting. Hitler's message, that Versailles was a betrayal, that democracy was weak, and that Germany could rise again, now fell on desperate ears. By 1932, the Nazis were the largest party in parliament. By 1933, Hitler was chancellor. The path to another world war was opening. The First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Instead, its peace settlement planted the seeds of the next. Germany's humiliation at Versailles, the struggles of the Weimar Republic, and the rise of dictators across Europe created a storm that the world failed to stop. This was only the beginning. In our next episode, we'll turn to the rise of a dangerous new political force: fascism. From Mussolini in Italy to Hitler in Germany and Franco in Spain, we'll explore how propaganda, ideology, and the promise of strength captured the hearts of millions, and how these movements reshaped entire nations. This is Shadows of War, the origins of World War II. The story continues. Subscribe to History Capsule for latest videos of this series.